Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Build Training Trip Harem with Tayuya Karin and Sakura, Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Sakura's stomach twisted as she shuffled into the classroom behind Ino. The room buzzed with excitement, the other girls chattering about what awaited them in their first kunoichi-only class. The air smelled of freshly sharpened pencils and nervous anticipation, but it all felt foreign to Sakura, who couldn't shake the growing sense of unease that gripped her. As the door slammed shut behind them, the room fell silent in an instant. The sound cut through the air, sharp and unsettling. Sakura's heartbeat picked up pace. Class. A woman's voice sliced through the silence like a blade, firm and commanding. The teacher stood tall at the front of the room, arms crossed, eyes scanning the students with cold precision. This is the first in a series of kunoichi classes. Over the next 3 years, we will delve into anatomy, chemistry, and physiology. The students, all eager and excited moments ago, groaned in unison. The disappointment in the room was palpable. I thought we'd be learning actual jutsu, a voice from the back muttered, the sentiment echoed by a few others. The teacher's eyes narrowed dangerously, and she slammed her palm against the desk. Enough. You are here to learn what no one else gets to learn, and you will do so without complaint. This is a class that has been designed specifically for you. One of the most closely guarded secrets of the shinobi world, and it starts now. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. Not even your families must know what we discuss here. Sakura shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the sharpness of the woman's tone unsettling her. The teacher's next words hung in the air like a challenge. But before we get to that, she continued, we first need to understand the human body. The anatomy, the chemistry, and the physiology that will allow you to control the one thing that makes you unique, chakra. The class was silent now, the initial groaning forgotten. Sakura's heart pounded. Was she ready for this? Could she handle whatever secret they were about to learn? Over the next few months, the lessons were a strange mix of discomfort and fascination. The girls had expected to learn jutsu, skills that would make them more powerful, more dangerous. But instead, they were forced to study the body. The male body. The female body. Every muscle, every organ. How chakra interacted with the human form, how it flowed through them and could be manipulated with the right knowledge. It felt clinical, detached, but also strangely intimate. And in a way, it made sense. How else could they be more than just tools on a mission? How else could they manipulate the energy flowing through them to become something more? Sakura was captivated. She asked questions, pushed the boundaries of what was taught, even if it made the instructors uncomfortable. Her classmates began to call her the teacher's pet, but she didn't care. This knowledge, this power, fascinated her more than any jutsu ever could. The second semester was when things started to feel different. The girls began studying how chakra interacted with their bodies, how endurance differed between males and females. They teased the boys endlessly, mocking how they seemed to tire after the smallest exertion, even though the girls knew they weren't quite in control of their own chakra flow either. It wasn't until the next semester that the true shock came. The day of the next class, there was something off about the room. A projector screen was set up in front of the chalkboard, and a curtained cubicle sat silently in the corner. The other girls murmured in curiosity, but a deep sense of dread coiled tighter around Sakura's chest. As the teacher entered, her usual stern demeanor was replaced by something else, a glimmer of mischief in her eyes. Today's lesson, she said with a slight smirk, will cover the male reproductive organs and their connection to the release of oozine. The room fell into stunned silence. Sakura's heart thudded in her chest. Oozine. The mysterious substance she had heard about in passing but never truly understood. She had no idea it could be connected to anything like this. At the back of the room, Hinata's face turned pale before she crumpled forward, fainting with a soft thud. I'll get the smelling salts. One girl shouted, rushing to Hinata's side. The teacher sighed heavily, clearly irritated, but with a hint of exasperated amusement. If this keeps up, I'll be tying her to a chair. She snapped her fingers, and the blinds covering the windows slammed shut, plunging the room into dimness. The projector flared to life, casting an eerie glow on the students' faces. Sakura could hardly breathe as the image appeared. Mercifully, the face of the shinobi was blurred, but the rest was shocking. A full frontal image of a man appeared on the screen, and the class collectively gasped. Another thud echoed across the room as another girl fainted. Sakura's mind reeled. She had heard of this kind of thing, of course, the secrets of what the kunoichi were taught, the mysterious roles they played in the shinobi world, but this was far beyond what she had ever imagined. She could feel her face burning, her thoughts tangled and confused. What did this mean for her? What was her future going to look like in a world that saw her as nothing more than an instrument to control and manipulate chakra in ways she hadn't even begun to comprehend? A heavy silence hung in the room as the teacher continued, unbothered by the reactions of the girls. This is only the beginning, the teacher said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The true power of a kunoichi is not just in what you can do with jutsu. It's in how you understand yourself, and what you are capable of doing with the body and chakra you've been given. Sakura's stomach churned, her thoughts spinning. This lesson felt like a betrayal, a reminder of how the world viewed her and all kunoichi. She was more than just a tool for a mission, more than just a vessel to be controlled. But as she sat there, listening to the teacher's words, she couldn't help but wonder if that was exactly what she was becoming. Sakura sat still in her chair, her body rigid as the weight of the lesson settled over her. The teacher's words had already cut deep, but the revelation about the seal, the one that now marked her body, was like an invisible hand squeezing her chest. The room was still, the tension thick in the air, as each girl processed the implications of what they had just learned. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The shared discomfort, the shock that seemed to radiate from every corner of the room, was enough to fill the silence. The other girls were reacting too, some with embarrassed giggles, others staring ahead, their faces a mixture of confusion, betrayal, and disbelief. Sakura, however, was trapped in a spiral of her own thoughts. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she felt the coolness of the ink drying against her stomach, the sensation of the seal pressing into her skin like a brand that would never fade. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed a line, one she couldn't uncross. Why was this happening? She had known being a kunoichi meant sacrifice, but this felt different. It felt like she had been made to kneel before a system that had already decided what her value was. To be useful, to be a tool, and now, to carry this mark. It wasn't just about power, it was about control. The lesson continued, but it barely registered. The details about the seal, the power it gave them to suppress the knowledge they'd learned, and the contraceptive purpose were nothing more than background noise. Sakura could barely focus. All she could think about was the sharp, invasive feeling of the seal, the way it had burned into her skin. Her mind flashed with the images of her future, a future bound by this decision. No matter how hard she fought or how far she went, she would never be able to escape it. Not now. Then, when the teacher began to speak again, her words were even sharper than before, cutting into the silence like a blade. From this moment on, you are the keepers of knowledge that can never be shared, she said. You will keep this secret for the rest of your lives. Those who leave, they cannot be allowed to reveal what they've learned. Do you understand? Sakura felt the weight of those words like a stone sinking in her chest. She knew that the other girls felt it too, the crushing gravity of what they had just been told. But for some reason, it felt even heavier for her. The teacher's gaze swept over the class, her eyes cold and calculating. This is the duty of a kunoichi: to serve, to protect, and to ensure that what you know remains buried. There is no turning back. Sakura's heart twisted in her chest. The girls who had left earlier hadn't just walked out, they had left behind everything they had once believed. And now, Sakura was being asked to carry that same weight, to shoulder that burden and live with the consequences. The finality of the moment was suffocating. There was no going back. No one could leave once they accepted this path. Sakura felt a hand grip hers, and she turned to see Ino's face, determined, unwavering. I can keep a secret if I want to, Ino had said, and now, her voice rang out in the room, as confident as ever. Sakura didn't know whether to be comforted or terrified by it. Her friend was unwavering. She, however, was filled with doubt. Ino's defiance rang out like a challenge to the room, but for Sakura, it only amplified her uncertainty. How could she live with this? With the knowledge that the seal would control not just her words, but everything that came after. Would she be able to live the life she had envisioned, or had the very fabric of her identity been altered forever? The teacher strode to the door and slammed it shut, the finality of her action echoing in the tense silence. The girls who remained had passed some unspoken threshold, and there was no turning back. One by one, the girls went into the cubicle. The room was thick with unspoken questions, but none dared to ask them aloud. The finality of it all made speaking seem pointless. They didn't need to ask what was happening. They knew. When it was Sakura's turn, she moved mechanically, her body stiff and unfeeling. She entered the cubicle, not knowing what to expect, but the woman inside didn't waste time with pleasantries. She just gave her instructions, cold, clinical. Sakura's breath hitched when the woman painted the seal onto her skin. It felt like her body was betraying her, the cold brush tracing a symbol of her servitude, of her transformation from a young girl with dreams of being a shinobi, to something else entirely, a tool of the village's hidden agenda. She didn't know how to feel about it. It was like her identity was being overridden by the seal, by this ritual she had no say in. When she left the cubicle, the seal now a tangible mark on her body, it was as though something had shifted inside her. The seal was more than just a physical presence, it was a constant reminder of everything she would have to bury. Her heart raced, and though she sat back down among the other girls, she felt more isolated than ever. A part of her wanted to scream, to ask why, to demand some kind of explanation that made sense. But she already knew, there was no explanation, at least none that would comfort her. This was the path of a kunoichi. This was the price. And she had paid it. And so, the leaf maintained its dominance. Its shinobi recovered faster, fought longer, and endured battles that should have worn them down. It was why their forces were feared. As Sensei concluded the lesson, an oppressive silence filled the room. Some of the girls sat rigid in their seats, others swallowed hard, processing what they had just learned, their minds struggling to make sense of the reality they had been thrust into. Sakura could feel the weight of the words settling over her like a cold, suffocating fog. This is the duty of a kunoichi, Sensei said at last, her voice heavy with finality. The price of strength. You have a choice. Stay and accept your role, or leave now and live as a civilian. The door remains open for those unwilling to bear this burden. A few girls rose and left without a word, their footsteps echoing in the silence before fading down the corridor. The remaining girls, though shaken, remained seated, their eyes downcast or fixed firmly ahead, unwilling to show their emotions just yet. Ino exhaled sharply, lifting her chin, her voice cutting through the thick tension. I can keep a secret if I want to, she muttered under her breath, her tone sharp, defiant. Sensei nodded slightly, acknowledging Ino's statement, before slamming the door shut with a force that made the room tremble. The finality of the gesture was deafening. The discussion was over. The decision had been made. Sakura's thoughts churned, a storm of frustration and anger swirling in her mind. As the names were called out, one after another, she winced each time a male name was announced, the implications sinking deeper with each passing moment. The weight of the system, the crushing reality of her fate, grew heavier with every pairing. The rules were clear. Female ninjas were bound to assist their male counterparts in ways that felt degrading, their roles limited to more than just combat. As Sakura listened, her stomach twisted with disgust. It wasn't just her strength that mattered. No, her worth, and the worth of every other kunoichi, was tied to her ability to fulfill a role that felt humiliating, degrading beyond measure. Marriage, pregnancy, high rank. Those were the only conditions that could excuse a female from these expectations. The thought that her only escape from this suffocating life would require something as extreme as marriage or bearing children made her skin crawl. How is this even justified? She muttered under her breath, her voice tinged with disbelief and anger. Her heart burned as the realization hit her hard. She wasn't seen as a warrior in her own right. No, she, and every other kunoichi, was viewed as a mere instrument, a tool to keep their male counterparts in fighting shape, to fulfill some twisted version of support that stripped away their humanity. Her fists clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. The thought of being paired with someone who didn't see her as an equal, but as a mere accessory to their success in battle, was unbearable. It took all her restraint not to walk out right then and there. But she couldn't, not when she had promised her parents that she would finish the academy, not when she had dreams of rising above this. If only the civilians knew what went on behind the scenes, the true cost of the victory and honor they admired. The female ninjas who performed breathtaking jutsu, who were lauded for their skill, were often nothing more than pawns in a male-dominated system. Warriors, yes, but also tools, expected to play a much darker, insidious role. Sakura's chest tightened, her breath coming faster as a wave of disgust surged through her. This wasn't the life she had imagined, the path she had dreamed of. But if the village wanted her to remain a pawn, then so be it, she would play the game. But not on their terms. On hers. She would play it to win, and she would rise above the shackles they tried to bind her with. Her eyes hardened with resolve, her mind solidifying into a single, sharp purpose. She would not be relegated to the role they had assigned her. She would rise through the ranks, become a jonin, and do everything in her power to shatter the limitations that sought to bind her. Her worth would not be defined by their narrow expectations. She would prove herself. She would become stronger, not just for her team, not just for the village, but for herself. For the woman she knew she was capable of becoming. It was important for ninjas to work together, and the village elders saw the actions required by female ninjas as a means to an end for teams to grow closer. Or at least that's what allowed them to sleep at night, knowing that their decisions had a greater purpose beyond the surface. This year, the Hokage took a special interest in team placements, going as far as requesting the medical records of all the female students. There was something he was searching for, and after leading the village for 60 years, he understood the significance of team assignments. The girl would be the key to this team. The challenge he was trying to solve this year was the presence of a male Jinchuriki, Naruto. He was a remarkable kid, brimming with hope and radiating a light wherever he went. However, it was his hidden, dark side that worried the Hokage. It was inevitable for it to surface at some point, and his team had to be prepared to handle it, especially the female member of the team. The Hokage understood the importance of finding the right balance and support within the team to navigate what lay ahead. "Here are the last of the medical reports you requested," said the chief medical officer, placing down a stack of pink folders. "The ones with the red flag are promising." He pulled out 3 specific folders and handed them to the Hokage. "Each of these girls has the required chakra network you are looking for," he said, placing the folders in front of the aged leader. Sliding one to the top, he added, "This one scored perfect grades in all of the medical-related classes. If she is not chosen for this team, I recommend fast-tracking her into the medical ninja program. Even if her clan is questionable." The Hokage opened the folder and carefully examined the details of the latest medical exam. Yes, this one possessed the regressive gene that the first Hokage had spoken about. Despite her age, her chakra coils were underdeveloped but exhibited impeccable control. His eyes focused on the diagram of the child's chakra coils. "Are you confident in this assessment?" he asked, pointing at the papers. "Yes, sir," replied the doctor. As described in the writings of the first Hokage, when he discovered survivors at the river village after it was destroyed by a chakra monster, all 4 survivors exhibited the same genetic pattern. She possesses the secondary chakra network. The Hokage contemplated silently. This girl would have a better chance of survival if she were to come into contact with the corrosive chakra of the 9 tails. What about the secondary side effects that the first Hokage documented? He inquired. The doctor turned to the window, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face, gathering his thoughts. The Yamanaka psychologist's report was buried at the bottom of the folder. Yes, she is showing signs of the dual chakra shadow personality syndrome, the doctor confessed, stepping out of the sunlight and back into the shadows. We hope that with proper training, unlike the other survivors, she will maintain stability even after being exposed to the demon chakra. Deep down, they all knew it was only hope that the second personality fueled by the demon chakra wouldn't take over completely, turning into something unexpected. What about the other 2? Inquired the Cage, tapping his finger on the remaining folders marked with a red flag. Yes, sir. They possess the required low chakra network in near perfect control, but they lack the gene, responded the doctor. The Cage glanced at the names of the Yamanaka and Hyuga girls before setting those folders aside. Retrieving his pipe from his robe, he went through the ritual of preparing tobacco and fire, using the moment to contemplate his next move before refocusing on the first girl. As he gazed at her picture in the class photo, all he saw was a pink, innocent child whom he was about to send into the clutches of a demon, all in the name of protecting the village. Thank you, Doctor. You may leave, he said, motioning for the doctor to depart. Leaning back further into the shadows, where such decisions were made, the Cage prepared to delve deeper into his meditations. The day Sakura was assigned to Team 7 brought a mix of emotions. She was filled with joy and excitement knowing that she would be alongside her beloved Sasuke Uchiha. Sakura was ready to support him in any way possible, offering her assistance and being there whenever he needed her, especially if he had a high level of oozine in his system. She understood the risks involved with the dangerous chemical, but her youthful optimism urged her to try and break through Sasuke's cold exterior. However, as the training sessions and missions progressed, Sakura realized that no matter how much energy Sasuke exerted or how much oozine accumulated in his body, he would never accept her help. Even when she made herself available and practically threw herself at him, he remained unresponsive. It was truly disheartening for Sakura, especially after a long and strenuous day of training, when he didn't even spare her a glance. He would simply announce that he would continue training alone at home and leave without acknowledging her presence. Sakura couldn't help but wonder what she should do if he didn't even look her way. As Sakura remembered her team assignment, she couldn't help but feel a sense of despair. It seemed that her beloved Sasuke showed little interest in girls, as he maintained a distant attitude towards them. She wondered why he wasn't placed on one of the exclusive all-male teams if that was the case. Recalling the moment she learned her other teammate would be Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura felt her heart sink. She found Naruto loud and short, and his bright orange tracksuit was simply appalling. On that day, every girl in the class sympathized with her, hoping she wouldn't give up or make any impulsive decisions. She was told to bear with it and not give up on her dream. However, Hinata, with her Byakugan, seemed to silently judge Sakura, and it made her skin crawl. To be honest with herself, Sakura couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for the blonde-haired orphan. But pity alone wouldn't prompt her to reach out to him or let him get too close, no way. His persistent requests for dates or to hang out only elicited her constant and sometimes very violent rejections, leaving her mad at the world. Didn't he understand the true meaning of love? Sakura firmly believed that she needed to channel all her energy into saving her beloved Sasuke, and Naruto's advances were nothing but a distraction. Despite the overwhelming despair that Sakura felt upon learning that Naruto would be her teammate, she managed to suppress her darkest thoughts, thanks to a small voice inside her head. It was that voice that prevented her from acting on her thoughts on the rooftop of the school. It would have been so easy to just push him off the side when Sensei shunshined away. However, she was pleasantly surprised to find out that while Naruto continued to pester her for a date, he refrained from seeking her help in relieving his accumulated oozine. There was a moment when Sakura had a private conversation with Sasuke, during which she almost pleaded with him to be her first, expressing her unwillingness to let Naruto touch her. Much to her irritation, Sasuke laughed it off, saying no. He assured her that she was safe. For some unknown reason, Sasuke said that Naruto had been absent from the boys' class when oozine and its effects were discussed. True to his oblivious nature, Naruto had utilized that free time to focus on his training. Even with her being aware of Naruto's lack of knowledge on the subject, she noticed him watching her on several occasions. His disheveled appearance, with dirty clothes and sweat pouring from his exhausted body, gave away his intense predatory gaze. There were moments when it seemed like he was going to approach her, especially after some grueling training sessions, but he would bite his lip and turn away. On one such occasion, his peculiar scent sent a strange giggle rippling through her inner voice, though she wouldn't explain why. She also had concerns about her sensei, Kakashi, potentially needing her help, but thus far he seemed to handle himself just fine. Sakura understood that as male bodies grew, they became more efficient at adapting to oozine, resulting in less of it entering their systems. She assumed Kakashi must possess a wide range of jutsu and extensive experience, which likely contributed to his infrequent need for assistance in removing oozine. Alternatively, maybe her sensei simply took care of himself quite frequently. However, Sakura didn't want to think about that too much. It didn't matter to her either way as long as he kept his hands to himself. Think about it. Sakura considered herself fortunate to be part of a team consisting of male members who hadn't required her assistance, at least not for now. Kakashi, with his ever-present copy of the Ika Ika Paradise novel tucked under his arm, entered the Hokage's office. He found the old leader engrossed in paperwork, his brow furrowed with concentration. Clearing his throat, Kakashi gained the Hokage's attention. "Ah, Kakashi," the Hokage greeted him, setting aside the paperwork. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to discuss something concerning Naruto," Kakashi replied, taking a seat across from the Hokage. "I've noticed some unusual behavior from him." The Hokage leaned forward, his interest showing. "Go on, Kakashi. What is it?" "Well," Kakashi began, despite the buildup of oozine in his system, Naruto hasn't approached Sakura for assistance in relieving it. It's quite unusual, considering how persistent he can be about everything else. The Hokage raised an eyebrow. "Are you certain about this?" Kakashi nodded. "Yes, I've been keeping a close eye on the team. Sakura has mentioned Naruto's constant requests for dates, but when it comes to seeking her help with oozine, he seems to hold back." The Hokage leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "Interesting. It seems Naruto is either unaware of the need for assistance or intentionally avoiding it. Have you spoken to him about this?" Kakashi sighed. "I've tried subtly mentioning it, but he brushes it off. It's as if he's intentionally keeping a distance from Sakura." The Hokage's expression turned serious. "We must find out the reason behind his behavior. Oozine buildup can have severe consequences if not managed properly. He could damage his chakra coils." Kakashi nodded in agreement. "That's why I wanted to bring it to your attention." The Hokage sighed, his gaze fixed on the village outside the window. "Very well, Kakashi. I'll arrange a meeting with Naruto and have a discreet conversation with him. We need to ensure he understands the potential dangers and the importance of seeking assistance." Kakashi smiled. "Thank you, Hokage-sama. I trust you can talk some sense into him." With a nod, the Hokage returned to his paperwork. "We must protect our young shinobi and help them understand the responsibilities that come with their abilities." Kakashi rose from his seat, readying himself to depart. "I trust in your judgment, Hokage-sama. I'll keep a close eye on things." As Kakashi made his way out of the office, The Hokage returned his focus to the paperwork, his thoughts consumed with formulating a strategy to address Naruto's lack of understanding. He would have to give that boy the talk before they went on their next mission in the morning. The mission they had been sent on was long and boring for the first 3 days. Boring, that is, until they were attacked repeatedly in the forest. Now, as she watched Kakashi stand up and walk away from the fire that Sasuke was nice enough to make for the team, they had decided to camp and rest before moving on. It seems fire jutsu is useful for more than just flashy shows to scare bandits away. Sasuke had never really hit anyone with one after so many tries. Currently, there were 4 tents set up around the campsite, and 3 members of Team 7 were present around the fire. After about an hour and a half of eating some rations and talking about the plans for tomorrow, Naruto had excused himself and embarrassingly gone to his tent, his body sluggish from his chakra exhaustion and the large buildup of oozing in his system. While Naruto was away from the fire, the other members of the team continued to discuss their mission. A simple C-rank mission had turned into a high B after some bandits had attacked them, trying to steal the storage scrolls they were currently bringing to a small village in the forest. After fighting off the bandits, Kakashi suggested Naruto create a mass of clones to scout ahead and scatter around the woods to confirm no other bandits were out there waiting to attack. Naruto happily did so, creating no less than 200 clones that quickly took off into the woods that surrounded them. Pretty impressive, Sakura-chan. He boasted with a sly grin on his face. A simple roll of her emerald eyes left the boy defeated and his smile gone. At least she didn't hit him this time. Even with Naruto's almost endless supply of chakra, it was no surprise when after 8 hours of keeping almost 200 clones active and alive, he was forced to stop and take a breather. Sakura would never admit it to the blonde, but it was pretty impressive. Her inner voice wouldn't stop talking about how he smelled of chakra as if chakra had a smell. Leaving the fire, Kakashi walked over to Naruto's tent, and she could hear him saying something through the tent wall to Naruto. Shaking his head, Kakashi pulled out his book of porn and turned back to the fire. The Hokage had had a long talk with Naruto, so Kakashi knew he now understood why Sakura or any other girl was on a team. Knowing that his plan had worked, now was a good time to see how good Naruto's control was over his chakra and the demon. This is bad, Kakashi muttered while walking away from Naruto's tent back towards the fire where Sakura and Sasuke sat, his nose still buried in that porn he called literature. "What's wrong, sensei?" she asked worriedly, hoping Naruto hadn't found anything bad with his clones. "That buffoon finally kill himself," Sasuke muttered as his dark eyes never left the dancing flames of the fire. The fire was good, fire understood him, and someday he will hit someone with it. No, not yet, but this can't be ignored. Sakura watched Kakashi's single uncovered eye travel from his book over the two of them. Honestly, he looked more bored to her than concerned, but then again, you can't tell when most of someone's face is covered and they only have one eye. "What?" she heard Sasuke ask as he finally took his eyes from the flame to look up at their sensei. "I'm afraid Naruto used too much chakra while scouting all day. He's got way too much oozing in his system, and if we leave him to take care of it himself, we'll be here for way longer than we can afford. We have to move out by midnight to keep our timeline." Kakashi's voice lacked any concern or interest as he flipped the page of his book, his eye stopping on her, and she couldn't help but frown under his uninterested gaze. "He told me not to worry about it, but as your sensei it is my job to make sure he's okay." It was chilly in the forest, hence why she was so close to the fire, but as she watched Kakashi slowly sit down, removing the book from his face, she felt sweat begin to form on the back of her neck. Wait a second. She almost whimpered out as she felt Sasuke's cold stare land on her, joining Kakashi's. "I'm afraid we can't." Kakashi spoke easily, his voice firm but collected. But he said he's got it." She could not help but feel her voice shake as she slowly stood up and took a step back from the now staring teammates. Sasuke's blank stare and dead eyes spoke volumes. He did think she was useless, and it showed. Well, he doesn't. and that means the responsibility falls on you, Sakura. Kakashi sighed as he looked back at his book. Remember your training and just get the job done so we can all get a couple of hours of sleep before we leave. We can't finish this mission if one of our members is slowing us all down. But Kakashi, just go do it already so I can get this pointless mission over with. It was Sasuke's voice, which surprised her now, her face now tinted red as all the blood rushed to her cheeks, and she turned towards her crush. He, like her sensei, didn't seem to show any concern towards her as she shakily stood there. But Sasuke-kun, she whispered, almost begging for any support from her teammate. Never once had the boy shown her any interest, even with her advances that would have left her blushing with embarrassment before graduation. She was praying he would at least back her up on this, not like she was asking him on a date. Sakura, Kakashi's voice brought her away from the uncaring black-haired teen, only to smack her back into reality. Are you a kunoichi or not? She stared at the man, her mouth slightly agape as he stared up from his sitting position. His eyes still appeared to be half-lidded, but she could tell by the shift in his voice how serious he was being. Not waiting for her to respond, Kakashi continued, because every kunoichi I know, knew of the responsibilities that could be tasked to them. You willingly joined the ranks and took an oath to serve under a team and work together with them. Now, one of your teammates, even if he won't admit it, needs your help. You may not have asked to have such a responsibility, but Naruto didn't ask to be born without the ability that females have either. So I'll say this one last time, go help him out and be done with it. This is something we have to live with. No reason to make it into such a big uproar. She wanted to argue. She wanted to stomp her feet like a child and tell him off, but ultimately knew she was wrong. She knew what was expected of her. They trained for this at the academy for years. But cucumbers and bananas were one thing, but this was the real deal. Her heart started beating rapidly, and she could feel sweat rolling down her back. The little laughing voice in her head wasn't helping either as it encouraged her to move faster. Both males watched as Sakura seemed to bite her lip and look over at the tent furthest away from the fire, where she knew Naruto was currently inside struggling to help himself. Fine, she said after a few moments, her voice quiet and defeated as she began to slowly walk towards the tent. She couldn't help but flinch when she heard Sasuke mutter, "At least I don't have to listen to either of them, useless." This was the last word she heard. She almost stopped at the boy's mean words but decided to keep going, not wanting to confront the last Uchiha and fearing another speech from her sensei. When she finally made it to the tent, she hesitantly raised a hand to the closed zipper inside. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto's voice rang out as she slowly pulled up the zipper, allowing some of the cold air to enter the very hot tent. What the hell are you doing? I told you I'm fine. Shut up, Naruto. The blonde's eyes widened as he quickly turned away from the opening to his tent, trying to hide from the girl whom he had been crushing on for the past few years. Sakura-chan, she heard him stutter as she closed the tent behind her. Once the zipper reached the bottom, she mentally prepared herself for what she was about to do. What are you doing here? Not that I don't mind or anything, just right now is kind of a bad. I said shut up, Naruto. Sakura's voice was low, and the male could tell she was angry. Sakura's nose crinkled at the hot musky scent that filled her nostrils as she kneeled in the tent with her knees pushed firmly together. The sweat on her back soaked through her shirt. Naruto's back was to her as he sat on his butt, trying his best not to turn his red face towards her. The blonde's signature orange jacket lay off to the side, leaving the boy in a very damp black shirt that stuck to his back. His orange pants were nowhere to be seen, and had it been under different circumstances, she would have laughed at his ramen-themed boxers. Looking at the floor next to the boy, Sakura couldn't help but give a disgruntled look at the thick white liquid soaking into an old t-shirt that lay on the floor. Geez, she couldn't help but mutter as she looked at the amount of semen the blonde had already worked out of himself. The entire shirt was covered in the stuff. There was barely enough room for the both of them to move without moving the sticky soaked shirt. Sakura-chan, she heard the boy weakly mutter without turning towards her. Sakura could only ground out an angry, "What?" as she tried to avoid the extra discharge splattered on the floor. What are you doing here?" Biting her lip as her eye twitched and a strange warm feeling started to grow deep down inside her, Sakura couldn't help but sigh once again. Just like Kakashi said, it was her responsibility and it wasn't totally Naruto's fault considering every male ninja suffered from this condition. "We can't have you slowing us down," Sakura said as she slowly wiped some sweat from her neck, feeling the intense heat of the tent attack her body. Kakashi said you're too stupid to help yourself, so he sent me in to help. What? She watched Naruto sputter as he turned his head towards her, still keeping his shoulders pushed forward, trying his best to hide. "I told him not to though. I don't want you to have to help me." "Yeah, me neither," Sakura said under her breath as she scooted a bit closer, trying her best to get comfortable, "but it looks like we're both out of luck. Let's just act like adults and get this out of the way. Now turn around." What? Naruto's voice seemed to pitch itself 3 times higher than normal as he tried to cover himself even more than he already was. "No freaking way. I already said I won't make you do it." Now growing angry with her frustrating teammate, Sakura couldn't help but growl, "God damn it, Naruto, this is gonna happen whether you want it or not. Kakashi and Sasuke both made me come in here, and I'll be damned if it was for nothing. Now turn around before I beat the snot out of you." Thanking whatever gods were watching, Sakura gave a small cheer internally as Naruto shakily began to turn around, using his arms to pivot his body. Sakura couldn't help but groan from the amount of sweat that was currently dripping from the blonde as he turned. He'd been going at it for a while and had already drenched the floor of his tent. She noticed he wasn't wearing his sacred headband and his damp hair stuck to his forehead. Sakura didn't even wanna think about how many times he'd already come and how many more lay in wait considering how much chakra he has and had used today. Looking down at the blonde's groin, Sakura couldn't help herself as her face began to heat up. Even though Naruto tried to keep his legs together, trying and failing to hide the cause of his embarrassment, Sakura was able to see the hard that jutted from the crotch hole in the boy's boxers. Why is it so big? She couldn't help but ask herself as she eyed the large piece of flesh that slowly leaked clear liquid. As it ran down the length of his, she couldn't help but wonder, where is it going? While she'd seen larger ones in books and demonstrations, Naruto was very large for a 15-year-old. The thick that slowly bobbed between the nervous boy's legs had to be at least 9.5 inches, and way too thick for her hand to fit around. Don't stare at it, Sakura-chan. She heard Naruto whine from above, causing her eyes to shoot back up towards his oceanic pair. She hadn't noticed she was leaning forward and was almost pressing her nose against the tip. Shut up, Baka, she said as she slowly positioned herself into a seated position, careful not to sit in the semen that lay on the floor. With her knees still firmly pressed together and that warm feeling in her gut growing every second. Scoot forward and open your legs or I'll break them, Sakura quickly barked as she looked at the blonde, and you aren't gonna tell anyone about this, Naruto, otherwise I'll make sure you never walk again. Getting a nod from the scared boy, he did as she told him. Place his knees on either side of her knees, their bare flesh just touching. Her eyes followed the piece of flesh as it seemingly started to inch closer and closer to her as he scooted closer. With his legs now open, Sakura was able to get a better look at the thick vein-covered member that was barely able to squeeze through the small hole of the blonde's boxers. The smell she first noticed was coming from his member and it was starting to affect her in ways she didn't understand. She felt herself warm up even more as she noticed a large amount of the liquid ooze from his fat head as she scooted closer, pushing his legs farther apart with her own. Giving one last sigh, Sakura shakily raised a hand and muttered, "Don't get used to this." Before Naruto could even give a response, his eyes were forced shut as he felt a small soft hand latch onto the base of his sensitive. Sakura tried her best to keep a neutral expression, but as she watched Naruto almost fall back, barely managing to catch himself on his elbows as he began to breathe heavier, she felt a small amount of pride in herself. She guaranteed no boy had ever squirmed that way under Ino's hands. As their eyes locked onto each other, "It's hot," Sakura thought to herself, remembering one of her teachers explaining to them the many techniques of working out a male's oozine buildup. Bringing her other hand to the thick head, Sakura lightly squeezed it, earning a low groan from the male. "It's so hard and soft at the same time. Now I just rub the underside," she thought as she used her other hand to slowly begin stroking the underside of the big, keeping her hold on the head, slowly and softly twisting it in her smooth palm. Once her hand was completely covered with his clear discharge, her hands started to move smoothly along its surface. Sakura-chan. From the way Naruto was her name, Sakura guessed she was getting the desired effect from the large and very hard. She could feel the length pulsate in her slippery hands as she began to stroke the flesh quickly. She couldn't help but feel a bit interested as she watched the clear liquid that had dripped from the head begin to turn much whiter and begin to slowly thicken. "I'm so gonna have to go to the river and wash up after this," she whispered as she quickened her pace, watching as the liquid ran over her small hands, covering her palms even more and allowing her to quicken her strokes. "Ooh, it's too good." She heard Naruto growl lowly as she continued her assault on his. She looked up at the blonde, noticing he was still wincing in pleasure, eyes now closed. His head was thrown back as his body arched into her hands, his elbows shaky as he struggled to keep himself up. Without her even noticing, he had moved closer so that his butt was now on her knees and the head of his was inches from her face. Sakura's eyes couldn't help but wander up as she noticed his sweaty shirt had begun to ride up his stomach, allowing her to see the blonde's muscled six-pack. Sakura wasn't stupid, and as she sat on her knees, jerking off her teammate, and admiring his strong developing abs, she realized the tent was getting a whole lot hotter. Looking back down at the now trembling flesh in her hands, she couldn't help but feel the pink hue return to her cheeks and her lower half now completely heated up. How good does it feel?" she asked as she twisted her hand across his tip, careful to catch all the pre-cum and rubbing it down his length, slowly jerking him off with it. It's amazing." Sakura-chan. Naruto's deep and pained voice sent a tingle up her spine and deep into her core as she began to stroke harder and harder, wanting to hear it again. Sakura-chan's the best. Flattery. Sakura could feel her own body becoming sweatier by the second in her red dress as she slowly leaned down, managing to catch a big whiff of the blonde's sweaty scent coming off the head of his. With her nose an inch from the trip and the smell filling her head, "Oh, my God," she thought desperately, as she watched the almost purple twitch in her hand. "Sakura." His voice sounded so much deeper than it previously had, and when she looked up, she noticed his canines were bared, and he seemed to be in pain. "Oh, She gripped tighter and stroked faster as she felt Naruto start to slowly thrust into her jerks, his large almost too big to be concealed by her small hands. She felt the jump in her hands, and knowing what was about to happen, Sakura moved the hand from the head, joining it with her other, and managing to finally fully wrap her hands around the base of the thick meat. She noticed that Naruto's elbows had finally given out on him as he slowly leaned down, panting harshly in the hot tent as he arched into her hands. His butt hovering over her knees and his now pointing straight at her face. Come on. Sakura couldn't help but mutter as she began to quicken her pace even more on the in her hands. "I'm gonna come, Sakura-chan," she heard him almost growl, his voice sounded so broken and strained. "Then do it," she cried out as she felt his suddenly seemed to thicken in her hands. She'd held rocks softer than the boys. Her voice, along with the pleasure he was receiving from her amazingly soft hands, seemed to be enough to finally push Naruto over the edge. The loud coming from the boy was driving her to move faster. "Holy!" Sakura managed to sputter out as she tried to avoid the cum that quickly began to shoot from the now jerking. The first 4 shots that hit her square in the face had such a strong push behind them that the shots spattered off her and landed all over the tent floor. So thick, she thought as she continued to jerk the cum, shooting, her hands and face becoming covered in the white thick almost mucus-like substance that just wouldn't stop shooting from the blonde. The smell, the feel, and for the love of Kami, the taste was intoxicating. Her inner voice was screaming words she just couldn't understand. Sakura. Naruto barely managed to cry out as he covered almost everything with cum. Sakura's face and the whole front of her dress were now covered in his load, and it just didn't stop. Her hands, as if having a mind of their own, just kept moving along the hard shaft. After a full 2.5 minutes of teeth grinding, eye-squeezing orgasm, Naruto's had finally started to slowly stop shooting, coming to a slow dribble. Letting go of the large member, Sakura noticed her breathing was quick and short, as if she just finished running for her life. She quickly grabbed the blonde's t-shirt and pulled it so hard it ripped off his body, and she began to wipe up all the cum off her face that had been sprayed on her during Naruto's orgasm. They didn't warn us that there would be this much, Sakura complained quietly, as she finished cleaning herself, her eyes still lingering on the still rock hard. Without thinking, she ate her lips, tasting the cum still on her lips, causing a shock to shoot down her spine and into her core. Naruto's eyes were barely open, stuck in a haze as he tried his best to catch his breath. That was amazing, he finally managed to grunt out as he lay in a pile of sweat, his chest heaving as a grin came to his face. Sakura-chan. Why, you're awesome. His heart still waving in her face as he rested his weight fulling down on her thighs. She couldn't help herself but stare at his muscular chest and abs now fully displayed. Tossing his now soaking t-shirt to the side, she sat back on her heels and took a deep breath to try to clear her head. You're still hard, Sakura whispered as she ran a finger from the base to the trip, giving it a push and watching it spring back up. Yeah, it takes a couple of times before it will stay down, Naruto said, turning his face away and hoping not to get hit after such a wonderful orgasm. With a burning feeling inside her that she didn't quite understand, Sakura reached forward with both hands grabbing the top of Naruto's briefs. If I have to do this, then I am going to finish it, and with a quick pull and a shout of pain, Naruto found himself laying on his tent floor with a red-faced Sakura kneeling over him. Looking between Naruto's legs, Sakura can now clearly see a pair of very large and very red balls. Those are larger than the ones in the pictures, she said with a strange little grin on her face. If I use a lot of chakra, they get bigger and bigger, Naruto said. They must hurt by the end of the day, don't they? Sakura asks shyly, reaching out a finger to touch one of the red orbs, causing a shiver course over Naruto's body. Oh, you have no idea, I can barely walk back home to take care of it sometimes, Naruto said, now looking at Sakura with big round eyes and I little hope. We will have to take care of that now, won't we? You're endangering the mission if I don't get you back in shape. With more confidence than she felt, Sakura reached forward and cupped those oversized balls in the palm of her hand to give them a soft squeeze. Dear Kimi, said Naruto, spreading his legs more and arching his back. Like that, don't you? Let's see if I can empty these babies. Sakura grabbed the base of his in one hand and rubbed his ball in the other. She started to slowly move her hand from the base to the top. With so much pre-cum leaking out of the tip, her hand moved with little resistance. Sakura locked her eyes on Naruto's most private parts, watching every little movement of his body like it was a new toy she had to play with. Make sure you cum a lot this time, I am not doing this again, you hear me? Moving her hand faster and faster while tickling his ball with her smooth soft hand. Nodding his head like a crazy man, Naruto stares at his dream girl with his and balls in her hands. With all of her focus on the rock hard in her hands, Sakura got up on her knees to move to his side and leans over the blonde boy before her, exposing her skin-tight biker shorts. Coverto, Naruto. They're wet, thought Naruto, staring even harder at that wonderful and perfectly round he dreams about every night. Then he sees the outline of pair of swollen lips at the base of Sakura's and smells a smell that turns off his rational mind. Taking his in both hands and doubling her effort, Sakura asks, how does it feel now, Naruto? Louder than before is all she gets for a response, putting a grin on her face. Come on, show mama what you got, big boy, yells inner Sakura as she looks into the one-eyed monster in her hands. Oh, God, cries out Naruto as once again a jet of cum shoots from his, hitting Sakura's forehead with a second jet spaying across her face. Without thinking, Naruto reaches out and cups his hand on Sakura's black clad and shoots the last and largest load all over Sakura, covering her face and the front of her now completely ruined red dress. As she feels the oh-so-warm cum spraying all over her, a shock of electricity shoots from her core to the base of her head and back again and again as she experiences her first true orgasm. Naruto's hand found the perfect spot and was rubbing her to orgasmic bliss. Losing all sense of space and time, she keeps moving her hands up and down even as the last of the precious cum runs down her hands and the once rock-hard finally goes soft. Falling forward but catching herself at the last minute with her hand in front of her, she finds herself on her hands and knees and an almost passed out Naruto underneath her. As she tries to make some type of sense out of what just happened, she feels wetness running down her legs from her core. Oh, God, what happened? I got to get out of here, Sakura thinks and steps back up and looks to her right at Naruto, who while calm looks a little like he is just beginning to come to his senses. Yeah, well, the pink-haired girl says with cum dripping from her cheeks as she began to slowly crawl backward, throwing the now ruined shorts at the blonde. Get cleaned up. You're all empty now, so I'm going. Getting a small thumbs up from the blonde, followed by a wheezy, sure thing Sakura-chan. Turning back towards the zipper, happy to feel the cool air hit her oh-so-hot body, Sakura whispered, and remember what I said. You tell anyone about this and you're dead. Naruto didn't even get a chance to respond as the girl quickly jumped out of the tent, zipping it back up behind her. The two guys at the fire didn't even look up as she ran to the river and jumped in fully clothed, pulling the dress off and letting the cold river water cool her overheated body before sneaking back to her tent to get some much needed rest and some clean underwear. Later that night, as they gathered their belongings to continue the mission, Sakura noticed Naruto and Sasuke talking off to the side. As Kakashi called for them to move out, Sasuke approached Naruto's still standing tent. Sakura couldn't believe her eyes when Sasuke agreed to help Naruto pack, but her disbelief turned to shock as he halted a dozen paces away and unleashed a shout of great fireball jutsu, engulfing the tent in flames until it was reduced to ash. What was that all about? She asked as they regrouped, leaping through the trees under the moonlight. There was no way I could use that tent again, Sakura-chan. You're just too good, Naruto replied, leaping farther ahead to dodge the kick she aimed at his head. The laughter of the men filled Sakura's ears as she blushed bright red in the darkness. A determined voice whispered in her mind, wait until next time, we'll show him how good we are. Author's note. This is a rewrite. I fixed some stuff and added a scene or two. She understood perfectly that the Chunin exams were supposed to be unforgiving, but after watching Naruto get eaten alive by a 100-foot-long snake and Sasuke get bitten on the neck by something that may have been a man or woman or something in between, Sakura was officially done with this stupid exam. She was ready to pack it in, go home and tell her mother she was right. Things went from bad to worse with her being forced to watch over her teammates' unconscious bodies, and then for the love of Kami having to cut her hair. The voice in her head was screaming for blood after that, and Sakura was in full agreement. Sasuke clearly wasn't okay, waking up and using some kind of terrifying power to fight off the three sound ninjas. Naruto luckily had seemed to recover well enough, even if he did mutter something about his stomach still hurting from when he was struck. Luck for her, Naruto didn't need any of her help after fighting all day. The forest of death had a way of putting a damper on any of his urges. All in all, Sakura was just glad to be out of the woods, and when she and her teammates were given a room to rest in, she almost cried. Sasuke quickly entered one of the two restrooms and locked the door behind him. The shower loudly ran as he tried to clean the accumulated forest crud off. She wondered if he was doing anything else in there but was shocked when she realized she didn't care if he was. Turning her eyes away from the bathroom door, she watched her blonde teammate slowly limp towards one of the beds, throwing himself face down on the mattress as easily as he could. He was in some pain from all the fighting, but still, he couldn't just lay there. All the dirt from his clothes was already staining the floor and now his sheets as he lay there unmoving. Aren't you gonna shower first? She couldn't help but ask as she waited to see if Sasuke would make any noise in the unlikely event he needed her help. Naruto mumbled out a low, "Not yet, Sasuke will probably be a while and I don't wanna hog the other bathroom." About to ask what he meant, Sakura quickly gave an, "Oh yeah," as she figured Sasuke had probably built up a lot of oozing. She assumed he was taking care of business. Privately, along with his best friend Mr. Right-Hander maybe left who cares at this point. "You can go Sakura-chan," Naruto said as he flipped himself onto his back and stared at the ceiling, "I'll wait till you get done." "Okay, but don't get in bed until you clean up, got that?" Sakura said staring at the noticeable bulge in the front of the blonde's pants. "You and Sasuke should go first, you guys fought way more than me," Sakura concluded as she turned back towards the blonde. "It's fine. I gotta take care of myself first anyways," was the response she got, and suddenly she felt her face heat up. She couldn't help but cast her gaze towards the boy's pants, wondering just how much he'd have in his system. Sakura would be a liar if she said that night in the tent hadn't crossed her mind more than a few times, and even though she would rather die than admit it, it had become a dirty little pleasure of her fantasies late at night. Closing the bathroom door, she looked back to a time before the exams from hell. Sakura was a good girl, she told herself. She had been her whole life. She had followed the rules, tried her best to be nice to those around her, and done what she had thought was right, but, she thought back to the weeks before the exams. Sakura felt her body throb as she felt her soft panties brush against her lips uncomfortably. So, she had started to play with herself just about every night, to her it wasn't that big of a deal. The voice in her head told her so and it was easy to just believe her inner voice. She understood how most civilians would react to a girl her age being interested in those things, but honestly, they could go themselves. She was expected to drain the boys around her like a leech but shouldn't like the pleasures that could come with being touched. To her, it seemed like a bunch of bullshit, and for good reasons. She discovered the pleasure of masturbation just a few days after the tent incident, and if anyone tried telling her it was wrong, well them, as Inner would say. It had been about a week after the incident in the tent. Naruto had done good, not opening his mouth about what happened, and her other teammates had just ignored it and never mentioned it again. While everyone else seemed to get over the ordeal, Sakura herself couldn't get rid of the images that had seemed to imprint on her mind. Those extra large balls and rock hard floated in her dreams. It was a hot night in Konoha, and as she tossed and turned in her bed she couldn't help but groan in frustration. They had said life was unfair and you would face challenges you couldn't overcome, but come on, this was crazy. Why can't I stop thinking about it? She had almost grit her teeth, cursing her blonde teammate for putting her in this position. His face and low groans echoed through her head as she envisioned him shooting thick wads of cum all over her body, her small hands trying to strangle the beast that was his. "Man," she whined as she stretched out, feeling a small bit of wetness forming in her panties. She slowly propped herself up on her elbows and looked down at her almost bottom. She had sweat through her clothing, so she had opted to sleep in an old t-shirt and a pair of silk panties she had gotten with Ino back when they still spoke regularly. Noticing the growing wet spot that had appeared and darkened the material, Sakura couldn't help but blush. That night, she had discovered a multitude of ways to please herself, her fingers being just the things she needed. She also discovered that orgasms were the most amazing thing ever. When Naruto had shot his load, she now understood why he had seemed so out of it. Fingering herself to Sasuke had brought her to orgasm quickly, imagining her teammate finally coming around and actually opening up to her. Then she had imagined their first time, giving herself to him and letting him make love to her body. She had wondered how it would be, and how the boy would respond to her body. Would he enjoy her? What if Sasuke was into bigger s? She pumped herself up, teasing her wet lips as she imagined him loving her the way she had always loved him, and knew he would accept her. She remembered slowly inserting a finger, biting back a small hiss as she slowly stretched her virgin hole for the first time, and her thoughts quickly switched from her dark-haired teammate to her more annoying blonde. Oh, she had come so hard, her body shaking as she felt her hot wrap around her finger tightly. She could imagine Sasuke coming to her and showing her his love, but when she pictured Naruto kneeling above her, his massive in hand, she couldn't help but join the voice in her head and cry out. She could barely fit 2 fingers, and as she rubbed her shaved smooth hairless pink lips tenderly, she imagined Naruto trying his best to shove his massive inside her, all the while telling her how great she was. He'd love it so much, she had muttered, raising her hips in the air as she added another finger to her honey pot. Moving now 3 fingers in and out of her hot, all she could think about was a blonde's rock hard. She imagined Sasuke would her lovingly, Naruto would do it like an animal. She had felt him thrust harshly into her soft hands, trying his damnedest to earn his orgasm. If he had rocked her arms as he had, then she could only imagine what the blonde would do to her inexperienced. Pulling her knees up to her chest, she moved her 3 fingers in and out, crying Naruto's name until she sprayed her own cum all over her bed. Her inner voice crying out with her. For once they were both in agreement. Back in the tower in the middle of the forest of death, she stared blankly at the wall. Sakura-chan. She heard Naruto's concerned voice speak, "Are you okay?" She'd been daydreaming, remembering how good it felt to think about the blonde's big that night, and subsequently almost every night since. She'd start with Sasuke's dark mysterious eyes staring down at her, but would always end up imagining those bright blue eyes at the end. "I'm gonna go take a shower." Sakura ignored the boy's question, feeling her panties become soiled with moisture she had learned was not easy to clean out. Quickly grabbing a pair of clean clothing from her bags, she set off towards the unoccupied restroom. She could feel Naruto's eyes follow her as she walked by and knew what he was about to do. Shutting the door behind her, Sakura quickly turned on the water and put her clean clothes on top of the sink. "Gotta stay quiet," she thought as she quickly began to rip away her clothing. It didn't take long for her to get her shorts and dress off, leaving her in her bra and panties. Diving a hand into said panties, Sakura quickly let out a soft as she began to tease herself, hoping the running water would drown out any evidence that she was currently in the bathroom, touching herself. "So hot," she whimpered as she took no time delving her fingers deep into her hairless folds, causing her to fall against the sink. She quickly sped up her movements as she let the situation sink in. Sasuke was in the other restroom, most likely masturbating, and Naruto was currently right outside the door, definitely jerking his huge, trying to satisfy his urges. She felt the slight tingle of an upcoming orgasm and quickly covered her mouth with her free hand. She edged softly as she allowed her fingers to increase in tempo, as she started to cum. She felt the hot liquid splash her feet as she curled her toes, riding out the orgasm as best she could. She stood looking in the mirror, smiling like a doofus behind her hand, weakly, and pretty much leaked on the floor. As she felt her body twitch, she shakily pushed away from the sink and leaned against the door. "Come on," she groaned as she circled her hard, sending shock waves through her small body. She wanted to be heard, or at least was enjoying the thought of it. What if Naruto heard and came looking to make sure she was okay? Catching his crush with her fingers buried in her would probably make the blonde attack her right there. Inner's cries of "open the door and let him try" echoed in her mind. Would she fight him? Probably not, the voice in her head agreeing with her. That's what worried Sakura. As these thoughts ran through her head, she imagined Naruto being aggressive, like he had with his thrusts. She couldn't give her virginity to Sasuke if Naruto forced his inside her and made her his own cum dump. It was still really hot to think about, though Sakura thought, even if it was totally ed up and dirty, but what wasn't in this crazy world of fire-breathing ninjas? "He's out there right now," she whispered through grinding teeth. Removing her bra and panties, she slowly pulled her lips apart and rubbed each side softly, playing with that fat. "I bet he could use a hand." Or a tight little hole, her inner voice said as she rammed 2 fingers back inside. Oh God, I gotta see, she muttered as she turned around, her fingers still playing slowly as she took a step from the door and slowly placed her free hand on the doorknob. She was quiet, or at least as quiet as she could be as she slowly cracked the door, careful to not allow it to open any more than she needed to. She couldn't help but buck against her hand as she watched Naruto do exactly what she knew he'd be doing. His legs dangled off the bed, his pants and boxers around his ankles as he laid back on the bed, his heart standing straight up like a flagpole, red and pulsating with his heartbeat. She could see his chest rising and falling with urgency, probably trying to finish fast so as not to be caught. His right hand worked his shaft quickly, moving from the base to the tip quickly and tightly as he groaned lowly. Sakura's eyes widened and her clenched her now 3 fingers she had pushed up in her as she noticed Naruto holding something up to his face in his left hand, and with a better look, she noticed the material to be pink. Sakura-chan, he groaned aloud as he took a deep whiff of the panties his face was currently buried in. It was the dirty pair she had switched out of 2 days ago after their first night in the woods. He must have stolen them from her forgotten bag when she left. He's sniffing my dirty used panties. Sakura knew she should have been disgusting, watching Naruto practically breathe in the cloth like it was fresh air, all the while jerking his rock hard. She could feel another orgasm approaching as she watched him throw his head back, taking another deep long breath. What I wouldn't do, she heard him grunt. Do it, her inner voice thought hotly as she struggled to hold herself up on her shaking legs. Those panties, come in here and get a taste of the real thing. Almost as if he heard the girl's thoughts, Naruto suddenly sped up his jerking and let out a low, throaty as he unloaded his first load into her panties. Sakura quickly shut the door softly as the first large shot of cum flew from the blonde, filling the panties with his hot warm cum until they were soaked and ruined. She quickly flopped down on the toilet, thankful the seat was down, throwing heat panties and bra off to the side, feeling free at last. Kicking one leg onto the side of the bathtub, and the other onto the sink, she brought her other hand down and began to lose herself. Ah, she was being a bit louder than she should have been, but as she rubbed her between 2 fingers, meanwhile pounding away with her fingers, she really couldn't help it. The only sounds in the room were the shower and the loud wet noises her was making. Oh, yeah. Sakura failed to hide her voice as she felt her body tighten up and her legs go numb. She let out a pitiful cry as she sprayed down the wall opposite of her, shooting her juices all over the place. As she watched through crossed eyes as she drenched the floor in her juice, she could only smile dumbly. God, this was good, almost too good. There was a soft knock on the bathroom door. Sakura, you okay in there? She heard Naruto ask. Startled, she jumped up, wrapping an oversized bath towel around her thin form, hoping her small would hold the towel in place as the door slowly opened. Everything okay? Naruto asked as she opened the door a couple of inches, peering into his blue eyes while clad only in her towel. Over her blonde teammate's shoulder, she could see Sasuke lying on the bed across the room, next to the one the blonde had somewhat dirtied earlier. I'm fine, she gave the blonde as confused look as she could as she tightened her hand around her towel and looked shyly down, looking at the oversized bulge in the front of his pants. Oh, Naruto said as he slowly leaned forward. There was that smell again pulling at him. The bathroom was filled with it as he inhaled a deep breath, his pants now getting tighter than before. I thought I heard you scream in there. I saw a spider in the shower. Sakura quickly lied as she took a small step back into the bathroom, allowing the door to open more. She noticed her dirty clothes bag was open, and on top was the pair of panties Naruto had been practically eating earlier, now soaked in that wonderful boy juice. Naruto must have forgotten to close the bag in his haste to check on her, but still blowing what she could only assume was a monster load, groaning through her scent as he got off. With that thought, a small line of juice slowly ran down the inside of her leg, and her heart started to beat faster. Her inner voice was yelling at her to just do it, do what was still in question. Turning towards her teammate who looked at her somewhat expectantly, she said, you should hurry up and get in here, that looks painful, looking back down at his now obvious bulge. Looking shocked as she hadn't so much as given him a smile after the tent incident. He gave a nod and looked over his shoulder to check that their teammate was fast asleep. She watched as he slowly walked into the bathroom, closing the door behind him. She quickly walked back over to the toilet and sat back down on the closed cover, motioning the blonde to come over and stand against the wall in front of her. Remember what I said? Not a word to anybody about this, she said, looking into those bright blue eyes. Yeah, not a word, I promise, the now hopeful blonde said. Good, now stand still and be quiet, she said as her hand reached for the belt buckle in front of her. It was harder than she thought to take someone else's belt off, but her quick little hands finished the job. With a sly grin at the corner of her mouth, she pulled down the zipper and dropped his pants to the floor around his ankles. He was still wearing those ramen-themed boxers, but at least these were blue, not orange like last time. With her mouth now closed in a determined line, she reached forward and with both hands, she pulled the shorts down to join the paints. Naruto put his hands behind his back and stood straight as his waved up and down with his heartbeat inches from Sakura's face. Did it get bigger? She thought as she placed her hands around the shaft, pulling it so it pointed at her nose. The clear fluid already running out of the tip coated her hands as she moved them slowly up and down. She could feel Naruto quivering, and looking up, she could see he had his mouth clenched tight. The feeling of being in control, complete total control, flooded her mind. Now not a sound, Naruto, we don't want Sasuke to hear, she whispered, moving her hands now securely wrapped around that wonderful even faster and faster. All she got was a nod and a grin, so she moved her hand up over the now red tip and gave it a little extra care. Her reward was an increased flow running between her fingers and Naruto's head, hitting the wall behind him as he tried to be quiet. With one hand playing with the head of his, she moved the other one to his balls. Weighing the heavy sack in the palm of her hand, she got a small whimper from Naruto. Taking this as a sign he liked it, she synchronized her hand movements, giving him the full treatment. With one hand now going from base to tip and the other rubbing his swelling sack, she couldn't take her eyes off the inches from her face. The feel and the smell were driving her crazy. If she hadn't already come multiple times tonight, she is sure she would lose control and let him her silly. Scooting forward on the seat and spreading her legs around the blonde pinned to the wall, she grabbed his with both hands, moving with a determined motion. Feeling her juices ruining the towel, she said, "Come for me, come lots," as she pointed his toward her face. Naruto was losing control and knew he was going to shoot his load any minute now, but wanting this to last as long as it could, he used all his willpower to hold on a little longer. His dream girl was begging him to come, and he couldn't hold out much longer. Looking down at the pink-haired girl working his eyes almost popped out of his head. The towel was slipping down with each movement of her hands. Little by little, more and more of Sakura was being exposed. He could now for the first time in his life see what little cleavage she had, and as the towel moved lower, the hint of I am going to lose it, he said more to himself than her, but she took this as a good sign and worked even harder. Come on, you can do it, she said, panting with her mouth open and her hot breath hitting the tip of his on each downstroke. With those words and the extra movement, the towel gave way and puddled around Sakura's waist unnoticed. In all of Naruto's fevered dreams, he never thought this day would actually happen. Sakura's S were small, he was sure not even a handful, but her S were bright pink, almost red and long, pointing out from her chest, begging to be ed. They looked so hard and soft at the same time. With each movement of her arms, those little wonders gave a small bounce and the S grew a little more in the colder air. Now, God knows he couldn't hold on anymore. Now Sakura-chan, now. He ed out and let loose with a shot of cum hitting full force on her upper lip. With the next shot she aimed a little lower, taking the full load straight into her open mouth. Pumping faster, she felt stream after stream hitting her face as she swallowed the first load and opened her mouth for more. The cum was running down her face and onto her exposed, coating them in a fine white sheen of cum. Her S stood out in a bright pink sea of white. She was able to catch the last shot of cum in her open mouth before he finally ran out, and a slow steady stream ran over her still hands as she stared in shock at what had just happened. Running her tongue over her lips and pulling in the last of the cum running down her face, she could feel her spasming uncontrollably as her own orgasm ended. She never had a touchless orgasm before, and as she watched, Naruto's legs gave out and he slid down the wall to land unceremoniously on his. I had no idea it would taste this good. There must be something wrong with me, her voice said in the back of her mind. It was clear that her inner voice was in control for the moment. With a small sigh and a smile, she didn't care. Looking at Naruto passed out in front of her, she remembered that snake bastard not being able to put him down, but she could. With a deep breath, she looked around and noticed the towel had fallen down around her. With Naruto out, she felt she didn't have to rush to save her modesty and started to rub the cum all over her and with her S sticking out between her fingers, giving them a pull and causing shivers of pleasure. I wonder if this will help them grow. Standing up and covering herself, she gave Naruto a not so gentle kick to the ribs. Hey, wake up, I got to take a shower, she said, coming back into control of herself, sending her inner back to wait in the background, she pointing at the door. You can clean up when I am done, now get out. Pulling his pants up and giving her a strange look, Naruto nodded his head and still not saying a word slipped out the door. Cleaning herself off of all that wonderful cum was a chore, and then wiping the floor clean. Knowing Naruto wouldn't do it, she got dressed in the clean clothes still on the sink and walked out of the bathroom. Seeing Naruto sitting on his bed with a silly grin still plastered on his face, she waved her hand at the bathroom door so he would know it was his turn. Looking over at Sasuke's sleeping form, she couldn't help but sigh with relief as Naruto closed the door, praying he didn't ask any questions about what just happened. Not understanding it herself. Days later, they found themselves back in the village after competing in some preliminary fights that thankfully knocked her out of the exams. They found themselves back on the bridge facing Kakashi and his ever-present orange book. What do you mean? Said Naruto. She could tell by his voice that he was more upset than angry, staring up at their taller sensei. I've already set you up, I don't see why it matters. Kakashi replied calmly, not even bothering to look back at the short blonde. Sakura actually shook her head at this. While she understood Kakashi's logic to a certain extent, it still seemed unfair and biased. Why did Naruto have to get trained by some stranger while Sasuke got their sensei's full attention? Of course you don't. Naruto shook his head angrily as he began walking away, leaving the rest of Team 7 alone on the bridge they currently occupied. What a loser. Sasuke mouthed as he turned his head away from his teammate. He had waited until Naruto was out of earshot. Sakura couldn't help but roll her eyes at her crush's insult. Of course, Sasuke would say something like that. He wasn't the one being ditched by their sensei when he was needed most. Kakashi may have still had his face buried in his porn, but Sakura could see him looking over the pages at the boy's retreating form, and with a sigh, he muttered, I'll have to take care of that later. Snap. The book he had been reading snapped shut loudly, and suddenly she was the one being scanned by his lone visible eye. Well, I'm afraid we won't be seeing much of each other over the next month. I do request that you still train even though you're not moving on to the finals. She practically had to keep her eyes from rolling back into her head as she looked at the man and nodded, of course. Kakashi nodded with a smile and turned back towards the dark-haired boy at his side. Well then, we should probably start our training then. Whatever, was the only response Sasuke gave as he turned towards the gate a mile or so away, ready to start. Wait! Sakura practically yelled as she took a step towards the pair. Now holding both the men's attention, she couldn't help but blush as she stared into Sasuke's dark stare. We won't see each other for another month. She stared as she nervously kicked a lone pebble, her fingers twirling at her sides. Would you like to get lunch or something before you set off? The answer she received wasn't exactly what she had hoped for, as Sasuke simply turned around with a tisk, and began making his way off the bridge, only to stop short and say, why don't you spend some time training while we're gone? I'm getting tired of watching after you. Looser. Sakura's arms fell to her side as she stared at the boy's once again retreating form. Kakashi could only sigh once again and shook his head as he slowly turned away from her. See you in a month, Sakura. Train hard now, don't forget. Her inner voice screamed, you Kakashi, as she used all her willpower from letting it out. Then just like that, she was alone on the bridge. She quickly wiped away the tears trying to spill as she shook her head and turned the other way, heading back towards the center of the village. As she began towards her house, she couldn't help but bite her lip in frustration. I wonder where Naruto went to, her inner voice said as they went looking for him. She was screaming loud enough for everyone in her home to hear, thanking God that both of her parents were out. She shook on her side in harsh spasms as she felt her start to tighten. As she felt herself start to go, she gave another loud. After a few minutes, when her orgasm had finally subsided, she slowly pulled her shaky hand away from her nether region. Her hand was wet and sticky from her own discharge. Oh my God, she whispered lewdly as she felt her body almost vibrate from the intense orgasm. It had become a daily occurrence, something she was doing more so to get herself through the day more than anything. She often found herself going back for seconds and sometimes thirds. It was truly addicting, almost like ramen. It was like the ultimate stress reliever, and now that she had experienced it, she kind of understood why people could become addicted to masturbation or orgasms or hell even, and after being so brutally turned away by Sasuke over and over, Sakura really needed to relieve some pent-up stress. Slowly rolling onto her back, she let out a sigh and groaned. Looking down at her nightshirt, she could see the outline of her pink S trying to push their way through the thin fabric. Still not growing, but boy are they getting more sensitive. Maybe Sasuke was right, she couldn't hold them back forever, and she really didn't put as much effort into her training as she should have been. Looking over at the alarm clock on her desk, she noticed it was a little past 7 and decided to go out. I'll find Naruto, she said as she slowly stood up on her wobbly legs. He'll definitely let me help him train for the finals. He may need a little help after training, she can do that for him at least. As she walked to the shower on shaking legs, then slowly gathered her clothes and got dressed, putting on an extra soft bra so her S don't rub too much. She let her mind wander about the blonde in question. She'd be a liar if she wouldn't admit that they had certainly become closer. Hell, she even cheered for him against Kiba, and when he stood up for Hinata during her fight, she felt a little bit of what some might call jealousy. Not that any of it mattered though. She still had feelings for Sasuke and opted to refuse to let whatever she slightly felt for the dumb boy get in her way. In her lips and remembering the taste of his cum, maybe she has time for one more quick orgasm before she leaves. He still was what she thought about when she was pleasing herself, but that was something she would lie about if she was ever asked. Even as she dropped her panties on the floor and laid back down on the bed for one more go. Where the hell could he be? She couldn't help but mutter quietly as she strolled around the village, pretending not to look for Naruto as she searched for him. She had looked in every place the blonde could or would be. She had actually gotten a little scared when she stopped by Ichiraku Ramen and the owner told her he hadn't seen the blonde all day. After that, her plan to gain a training partner had turned into a quest to make sure her teammate hadn't done something stupid. Maybe he was more upset about Kakashi ditching him than I thought, she couldn't help but think as she continued her search. She proceeded to check out any other areas of interest but still came up short-handed. Noticing how dark it was getting, Sakura began to grow a bit more concerned. Seeing the sunset behind the walls of the village, she stopped to think. Maybe he's at home passed out, she thought as she began walking in the direction of Naruto's apartment complex. It took a few minutes, but soon enough the familiar rooftop of the building came into view. You'd better be home, Baka, she whispered under her breath as she began marching towards the building. He may need some help after training all day and she just knew the right person to give it to him. Crossing the street and walking towards her teammate's home, the pink-haired girl came to a complete stop when she heard something loud and familiar come from the alleyway on the side of the apartment building. That sounded like Naruto, she thought as she looked towards the dark entrance of the alley, gulping as she looked back towards his apartment. Maybe he ran into trouble on his way home. That wasn't the sound someone in trouble makes. She felt the stupid voice in her head laugh as she slowly began tiptoeing towards the entrance. No way he'd do that out here, but then again he may need a little help, she whispered as her face seemed to flush at the idea of catching Naruto pleasuring himself in the alley. Masking her steps silently as best she could, she slowly made her way through the somewhat tight spot between the two buildings, holding her breath as she took small quiet huffs through the palm of her hand hoping he didn't hear her getting closer. The alley couldn't have been more than 20 feet long or so, but as she walked down the hall of darkness, inch by inch, it felt miles long. It was totally dark with little light making it into the alley. Her emerald eyes scanned wildly, looking for any sight of her teammate, and when she finally caught sight, she nearly exposed herself with a deep breath. The alley had opened up into a dock for deliveries for the small businesses that shared this alley. Ducking behind some very conveniently discarded boxes, Sakura quickly tightened the hold on her mouth as she peeked from the side to make sure what she had seen was right. Naruto wasn't alone, and he wasn't pleasuring himself. He was standing under a small light by a door with his head leaning back against the wall with his eyes closed. Sakura couldn't help the familiar heat that settled in her most private place as she watched Naruto gasp softly, tossing his head about as he leaned against the brick wall behind him, panting heavily as he squeezed his eyes tightly. It was still dark, and as Sakura tried to focus on who was between the blonde's legs, she bit her lip as she realized who was currently downing her teammates, happily slurping at the boy's length nestled down her throat. How dare someone touch her stuff, she raged but stayed still so as not to be seen. Does that feel good? Her somewhat deep voice rang lowly as she pulled away from Naruto's with a loud and wet pop. You want more? Naruto gave a small shake of his head no but didn't do anything to stop the woman in front of him. Anko, you scary bitch, Sakura thought, wanting to jump out and declare, back off, that's mine, finally remembering where she'd seen the woman before. The Chunin exam instructor quickly swallowed Naruto's back up, causing the blonde to let out another strangled as his body tensed. Sakura felt her body tighten as she watched the older woman's head slowly begin to descend, a loud satisfied groan coming from the purple-haired woman as her nose came to rest against the boy's groin. How the hell did she do that? Sakura whispered, her own throat choking at the idea. Sakura could feel herself getting wetter and wetter as Naruto finally seemed to submit, his hips lowering slightly to allow the kneeling female to have better access to his. Holy! Sakura thought hotly as she watched Anko slowly bob her head, the noticeable bulging in her throat not bothering the woman at all. I got to get some of that, her inner voice said in the back of her mind. Rubbing her legs together slowly, Sakura felt her body tremble as Naruto slowly brought a hand to the back of the woman's head, and from the Anko gave, he was encouraged to take a gentle fistful of hair. He slowly began to thrust his hips forward, effectively burying his back down the woman's throat. It was hard to tell from her position but Sakura could make out Anko dropping a hand that seemed to disappear into her short skirt. She's playing with herself. Sakura was jealous, more so that she couldn't do the same out of fear of being caught. She may have also been slightly jealous of the Anko was giving as she started straight up at her panting teammate as he kept slowly pumping his hips. It had gotten late, and she could see another light flare on behind the pair, which illuminated them. Sakura thanked God the street lights weren't giving her away as she finally got a decent look at the Ing woman. Without even consciously thinking about it, Sakura pulled her dress up and shoved a hand down her black biker shorts, sinking one and then two fingers deep inside her soaking wet. Damn, they looked hot. Anko's trench coat was practically falling off, open, and exposed. Sakura could see the woman's hard S poke out from the tight mesh shirt she was wearing, brushing against Naruto's pants every time he thrust forward. Sakura had to lean down a little more, but she finally got a good look as the woman rubbed herself under the small skirt she wore. Sakura's hand moved faster in the tight confines of her skin-tight shorts. No underwear at all, Sakura realized as she noticed Anko's polished nails slowly work her uncovered, her long fingers playfully rubbing her wet lips. The black hair around her dripped with excess fluids. Ah! Naruto's voice brought her gaze back from the woman's exposed as she watched her teammate bite his lip as he looked back down. Seeing what she was doing was driving him crazy. MHH. Anko once again pulled away with a loud pop, placing her free hand on the blonde's thigh to stop his throating for a second. Look how hard you are, you got so much build up, huh? I told you I was training. Naruto spoke for the first time, his voice very deep and throaty. Sakura could see how frustrated the boy was, sweat pouring down his brows in large droplets. She knew he had been training all day, if only she had been a little faster in finding him. You must have been training harder than anyone's ever trained before. Anko's smile was dangerous as her hand took hold of the boy's, her other hand leaving her dripping so she could fully grip the girth of the. She moved her hands up and down the piece of meat. I knew you were special. Her voice came out somewhat shaky as she pointed the upwards, making Naruto tighten his fists as he let go of her hair. She slowly leaned forward and placed her plump lips on the hard length. When I tasted your blood, she said, slowly smoothing the underside of his, her brown eyes looking up at him teasingly, I knew I had to have more of you, and if I knew there was this much I would have come a lot sooner. Letting the go, a loud slap sounded as Naruto's plopped on the woman's cheek. Sakura could see the thick pre-cum drip down her face as she slowly began to nudge her teammates with her face. The smell of reached over where Sakura was hiding in the shadows, causing her to shove her fingers in as deep as the damn shorts would let her. I've had so many boys like you, Anko was whispering now, and surprising both teens, quickly stood up. Sakura watched as the older woman towered over her helpless teammate, his fat jutting out against her thighs as she pushed herself closer to him. Do you like them? Her voice was so sultry that it made Sakura nervous and to take some mental notes on how it's done. Now holding the back of the blonde's head, the woman buried his face in her mesh-covered chest and pushed forward, effectively trapping Naruto between the wall and her tits. So many, she sounded hotly in his ear as she began to rub his face with her chest, the mess of her shirt preventing any real contact. Naruto clearly was affected by the loud groan he was letting out, only to be muffled by the large he was buried in. They were all throwaways. Anko was now reaching down, grabbing Naruto's as she positioned her legs over the large piece of meat, locking Naruto between both her long muscular legs, but I think not you. Sakura hadn't even noticed Anko had let her trench coat drop, now standing above the blonde in her mesh shirt and short skirt. Oh, my Kami. Sakura had to stop herself as she noticed what Anko had done. Naruto was hunched between her and the wall, his which was in her grasp was positioned right below the woman's. Her wetness and his own pre-cum now covering his. Do you want it, kid? Anko seemed to giggle teasingly as she gave a slow stroke to the boy's length with her thighs. I'll let you have it if you really want it. Naruto jerked forward as he seemed to stop struggling in her chest. His quickly slid across the length of the woman's hairy and settled between the juncture of her thighs. Oh, yeah, Anko groaned lowly as she closed her legs, even more, trapping his hard length in her fleshy thigh meat, the top of Naruto's brushing against her hot. I can't help it. Sakura couldn't think straight as another of her own hands shot towards her own groin, rubbing small circles around her as her other hand continued to pump in and out of her little hairless the thin spandex of her shorts, slowing her down. Me. Anko held the boy tightly as he thrust wildly into her thighs, his grunts growing louder and louder as the woman's thighs tightened around his. You want it so bad. She was hot, Sakura could tell. Sweat had begun to pile on the older woman's forehead as she tried to control the blonde. Naruto gave a particularly harsh thrust that caused the woman to let out a throaty as his pushed up against her overheated. Sakura could feel herself come undone as she watched her teammate the older woman's thighs desperately, trying to position himself right to bury his hard length in Anko's hot walls. "Oh, kid," she said as Sakura watched the older woman's body start to shake slightly, "you're so imperfect." Naruto grabbed the woman's hips and used all the strength he could muster to quicken his thrusts. She could see the fat head of his. It was quickly sliding under the woman's large bottom, nestled between Anko's cheeks. With every thrust she noticed more and more thick liquid dripping down the woman's legs and coating her cheeks thoroughly. "I'll make you a deal, Blondie." Her voice was heavy, and filled with unfulfilled lust as she seemed to gyrate her hips against the boy's thrusting. "If you win your next match, I'll let you do it. I'll let you take that fat young and shove it so deep in me I'll be tasting you for weeks."